everyone. I'm Elaine Quijano. Thank you for joining us for our special coverage of Day 2 of the 2020 Republican National Convention. With protests again Tuesday night in the Wisconsin city of Kenosha over the near-fatal police shooting of a black man, plus a powerful hurricane bearing down on the Gulf Coast, and more than 5.7 million confirmed coronavirus cases in the U.S., with more than 178,000 Americans dead, the Republicans played up America's promise under President Trump on night 2 of the RNC, with little mention of any of those things. First Lady Melania Trump delivered the night's keynote address from the Rose Garden at the White House. She reflected on some of her favorite moments from the past 3.5 years. The president's youngest daughter, Tiffany, and son, Eric, also spoke. Tiffany urged voters to make their judgment based on results and not rhetoric, while Eric spoke about the need to protect American values with another Trump presidency. The theme for the evening focused around the land of opportunity, with speakers following a similar tone to the first night. They praised President Trump for his leadership while criticizing Democrats and their nominee, Joe Biden. Here's more of what you may have missed.
At the Democrats' convention, we were told to look at Joe Biden as the model of integrity. But when you look at his 47-year career in politics, the people who benefited are his family members, not the American people.
Joe Biden. Joe Biden is a politician who has been in government for 47 years and does not know the slightest thing about the American worker or the American business.
Look, our economic choice is very clear. Do you want economic health, prosperity, opportunity, and optimism? Or do you want to turn back to the dark days of stagnation, recession, and pessimism?
President Trump is the first president in a generation to seek to end war rather than start one. I fear Biden will choose war again. He's supported the war in Serbia, Syria, Libya. Joe Biden will continue to spill our blood and treasure. President Trump will bring our heroes home. While others talked about criminal justice reform, President Trump actually signed the First Step Act, the first real reform in a generation, and one that sought to undo the harm that others, like Joe Biden, have done. To those of you who want to stand up and fight the socialists poisoning our schools and burning our cities, join me in supporting President Trump.
In the view of the radical Democrats, America is the source of the world's problems. As a result, they believe the only path forward is to erase history and forget the past.
I learned what was happening to me had a name. It was called being canceled, as in annulled, as in revoked, as in made void. Canceled is what's happening to people around this country who refuse to be silenced by the far left. Many are being fired, humiliated, or even threatened. And often, the media is a willing participant. And I know you'll agree with me when we say that no one in this country has been a victim of unfair media coverage more than President Donald Trump.
This is a fight for freedom versus oppression, for opportunity versus stagnation, a fight to keep America true to America.
Let's bring in Caitlin Huey-Burns, Leslie Sanchez, Michael Starr Hopkins, and Jessica Levinson. Caitlin is our CBSN political reporter. Leslie is a CBS News political analyst. Michael is a Democratic strategist and founding partner of Northern Star Strategies. And Jessica is a professor at Loyola Law School and also the host of the podcast Passing Judgment. Welcome to all of you. Caitlin, let me start with you. What did you make of the tone and the focus of the remarks that we heard tonight on night 2 of the convention? Who was it that message was aimed at?
Well, I think a couple of things. One way in which tonight was similar from last night, and another way in which it was different from last night. A way that it was similar was that there was really no acknowledgement, except for Melania Trump's speech at the end of the night, about the pandemic that we're in and about the situation that we are in. Melania Trump was the only one who expressed sympathy for COVID victims and acknowledged this moment that we are in our country. All the other speakers and all of the other programs programming was geared towards a world in which a pre-pandemic world. And we saw that theme throughout the night on the first night, Republicans not wanting to really acknowledge the situation that we're in with the pandemic and trying to get viewers to think about how things were before all of this happened. And you heard a lot of talk tonight about how China caused this virus and so forth. So that's what was similar. I think what was a little bit different tonight, I think a lot of this messaging and a lot of this programming tonight was geared towards those disaffected Trump supporters, those people who voted for Trump in 2016 but have been turned off by the rhetoric, turned off by the behavior, and may have started to give Biden some kind of a look, or may have been thinking about not voting at all. I think this kind of programming was designed for those voters in addition to the base of the party.
Jessica, let me turn to you for a moment, because I do want to address something that as soon as this segment began, really kind of began to light up the social media space. The president took part in a pre-recorded naturalization ceremony, and we saw acting DHS Secretary Chad Wolf lead that event. Would that be a violation of the Hatch Act?
Yes, absolutely. It could be. This is very, I have to say, as somebody who's thought about the Hatch Act, taught the Hatch Act, it's bizarre to see a Department of Homeland Security official, a high-ranking member of the government, leading an official activity, an oath ceremony, in his official capacity on a convention video, on a political video. This is exactly what the Hatch Act is meant to guard against, which is federal employees using their position, using their resources, using their time for political activities. It's hard to think of a more quintessentially political activity than a political convention.
But give us a sense, though, what could the consequences be here? Who actually has final say over whether or not an executive branch employee has violated the Hatch Act?
Well, that's a great question, and this is where I think we're not going to see enforcement, because we've seen Hatch Act questions, frankly, throughout this administration. I remember, I believe you and I actually spoke about Kellyanne Conway having questions about violating the Hatch Act months ago now. And so this would go first to the White House has an ethics council, an office. If they want to refer it, it could go to the Department of Justice. I think there's just absolutely no political will at this point. The chief of staff also can get referrals of these types of ethical violations. I just think there's no appetite. Kind of same question when we saw Ivanka Trump endorsing certain products, like the Goya products, and the President Trump doing the same thing. We have these laws on the books, but we also have an environment where we're not seeing enforcement. So it's this kind of existential question about what the laws mean if nobody's enforcing them.
And Leslie Sanchez, so let me turn to you. Is there any political consequence at all to something like a potential violation for the Hatch Act? Or is this something that, in fact, as Jessica points out, in the end, ultimately won't amount to much?
Well, it's hard to say whether or not they cleared this through White House counsel, right, in advance of that. You would think that they went through these certain types of protocols and do all that together. And part of that argument, you can hear that being made, is that it's such an unusual circumstance, conflating both the president running for office, using the White House, and kind of all of these elements together, and then to add another kind of government observation of an immigration swearing-in ceremony. I don't have the answer to that, but those are certainly questions. It's doubtful that they went into this without thinking about the consequences. And from a political perspective, it's a big win for the president. It was a very unique moment. A lot of people have very special feelings about these types of events. Particularly, it's such a proud moment in time, regardless of your politics. And that moment of bringing it together is a political win. But they're going to be, certainly, to Jessica's point, kind of parsing out where that line was in doing so.
Leslie, Caitlin a moment ago mentioned there being not all that much discussion of the coronavirus. And I want to play from earlier in the evening, White House economic advisor Larry Kudlow, when he did talk about the virus and the pandemic in the past tense. Let's go ahead and listen to some of that.
Coming out of the deep pandemic, who in their right mind would pick the pockets of taxpayers and drain money from their wallets and purses? Look, our economic choice is very clear. Do you want economic health, prosperity, opportunity, and optimism? Or do you want to turn back to the dark days of stagnation, recession, and pessimism? I believe there can't be better economic policies than we've had in recent years. So I say, stay with them.
Leslie, what did you make of that? He was there, talking about what he says is this stark choice between a Biden presidency and a continuation of the Trump presidency, but moving beyond the current pandemic that we are still very much in the middle of at this moment.
That is the entire argument, Elaine. If anything, it was extremely clear in terms of how this is a base convention. We are basically down to base versus base, Republicans versus Democrats. A Republican and the Republican message, if you would have asked in March and April how Republicans felt about the president's chances looking forward to November, there was a lot of hand-wringing. This is going to be a doomsday. It's the worst time ever. Cannot believe. And for a lot of reasons that the Democrats talked about last week regarding the president's leadership and his style, his approach, and his failings, many argue, dealing with the coronavirus. The distinct differences, Republicans and this line of argument that Kudlow is moving forward is a stronger economy, getting to work in these circumstances, finding ways to bridge our safety with keeping small business open is going to power the economy, get people back to work faster, open schools faster, and give people that economic lifeline going into 21. And certainly the markets are responding to that. That's where we're headed, so to speak. And to think about slowing, the contrast they're going to say is Democrats want to slow everything down, close everything up, and stifle your ability to provide for your family. That's where this line is, and the president and his surrogates are making a very strong case.
Michael, let me turn to you. It was interesting as I was listening to the First Lady. She began by offering her condolences and expressed empathy for all of those who have been affected by the coronavirus pandemic. And throughout her remarks, at one point, she talked about her own reflections at this moment of racial reckoning in our country. And I want to go ahead and play a little bit of that and ask you about her comments on the other side. Let's listen to that.
Like all of you, I have reflected on the racial unrest in our country. It is a harsh reality that we are not proud of parts of our history. I encourage people to focus on our future while still learning from our past. We must remember that today we are all one community comprised of many races, religions, and ethnicities. I like to call on the citizens of this country to take a moment, pause, and look at things from all perspectives. I urge people to come together in a civil manner so we can work and live up to our standard American ideals. I also ask people to stop the violence and looting being done in the name of justice, and never make assumptions based on the color of a person's skin.
Michael, what did you hear in the First Lady's comments there?
You know, I heard a lot of nice words, but I've learned, whether it's Melania Trump or Donald Trump, to look at the actual actions. And Melania Trump, as well as her husband, are individuals who engaged in birtherism against President Obama. So, you know, I'll take her words with a grain of salt. But what I saw tonight was almost an alternative universe. We saw a president who at one time tried to ban Muslims because of their faith, then talk about religious freedom tonight. We saw a president who referred to immigrants as criminals who wanted to put a moat with alligators and sharks in it to keep immigrants out, now use the White House and newfound Americans as props in his campaign. There was a grossness to, I think, a lot of the convention tonight in terms of the use of people as props and the use of the White House and taxpayer dollars as props. You know, the president likes to talk about law and order, but what we saw were clear violations of the Hatch Act by members of his staff. And I don't know how we manage to actually have laws, how we have institutions, if we're just going to continue to allow this president to bowl over them.
Caitlin, I want to jump off of that last point that Michael was making about this notion of a potential violation of the Hatch Act there. From the voters that you have spoken with, and I know earlier on, before the pandemic, you were actually able to go out on the campaign trail and attend some rallies. This kind of attention and pointing out by reporters and journalists, as Leslie points out, may actually be a political boost, though, to the president as coverage of this continues.
Yeah, and I think that's the intended effect, although I agree with Michael that these are not normal times, and we should point out that this is not legal, it's illegal, and the president is not only breaking norms by doing this, but also breaking laws in place. Having said that, looking at the strategy and what we've seen this administration do before is kind of just blow over this, because they know that their base of supporters aren't going to really care about the nitty-gritty of this. They want to be able to see the president in action, and being at the White House and having these kinds of appearances does that to an effect. And they also want, probably suppose that those voters that are a little bit disenfranchised by this White House, who were otherwise inclined to Republicans before, might not be as interested in the weeds of the policy and the law either. So while it's extremely important for us to point out that this was illegal, and you can imagine the uproar if someone else had done this, from a political perspective, this is something that the administration sees as something that doesn't matter, and also something that agitates the other side enough to kind of rile up their own side.
I want to point out one other thought, and as we look to the rest of the convention, I wonder if this is something we may hear more of. The Attorney General of Kentucky spoke in remarks during the convention. Let's go ahead and play a little bit of what he said when he went directly after Joe Biden. Let's listen to that.
I think often about my ancestors who struggled for freedom. And as I think of those giants and their broad shoulders, I also think about Joe Biden, who says, if you aren't voting for me, you ain't black, who argued that Republicans would put us back in chains, who says there is no diversity of thought in the black community. Mr. Vice President, look at me. I am black. We are not all the same, sir. I am not in chains. My mind is my own. And you can't tell me how to vote because of the color of my skin. Joe Biden is a backwards thinker in a world that is craving forward-looking leadership. There's no wisdom in his record or plan, just a trail of discredited ideas and offensive statements.
Michael, I want to get your thoughts specifically on what we just heard, knowing the backdrop here with the death of Breonna Taylor. What did you think when you heard that? Because Joe Biden has, in fact, been criticized for those comments that we heard the Attorney General quote there.
Look, I have been critical of Joe Biden when he's been too flippant, especially when talking about African-American rights and African-American history. But to hear that individual talk about Joe Biden using offensive language when referring to African-Americans or implementing policies, I mean, Donald Trump is the same individual who literally tear-gassed Americans protesting about African-American rights and about Black Lives Matter. This is a person who celebrated individuals carrying tiki torches in Charlottesville, screaming, "Jews will not replace us." So, just to be frank, I get that the line's shorter on the other side, but Donald Trump is not representative of someone who wants to help African Americans or someone who believes in equality for all. So, I'll let voters decide who the best person is for the African American community.
Finally, Leslie, I want to turn to you. What are you looking for in the next couple of days of the Republican convention?
Sure. I do want to address that one point, Elaine, because I think that's really important. In that part, there's mud on both sides when it comes to how Republicans and Democrats have dealt with the issue of race, particularly, and the caustic language. So I don't think there's a pass on either side, but I do think that an individual like we heard tonight has the right to his own truth, and that truth is what he believes, and he's offended by those comments, and I think that's where we need to have bigger conversations, because I don't believe in ethnic solidarity. We are all the same. There's personal interest. People are thinking about how it affects their community, and that's part of the drumbeat you heard on the message today, that this, and they talked about this kind of coming in groups and all, getting away from how we are going to address and fix these issues. And it just reminds me, I think, Elaine, we're going to hear a lot more. I was reading back on Ronald Reagan's speech, the big last speech he gave in 1992. I was there, it was in Houston, and he said, I hope we think more, speak more to our hopes than our fears. And that's where this train is going, is how they're going to be looking ahead to a stronger country economically, from a health perspective, and people's personal educational aspirations. How is all, and certainly the racial issues. And I think, if anything, that's where the president, not the first lady, need to address to really start to connect with many of these voters. I don't think there's a lot of voters in the middle anymore. This is a base vote. This is going to be a get out the vote, turning out your base. But those are really important, whether you're Republican or Democrat.
All right, Leslie Sanchez, Jessica Levinson, Caitlin Huey-Burns, and Michael Starr Hopkins, thank you all very much. Really appreciate your insight.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Another big moment of the night focused on abortion. Here's what anti-abortion activist Abby Johnson said.
For me, abortion is real. I know what it sounds like. I know what abortion smells like. Did you know abortion even had a smell? I've been the perpetrator to these babies, to these women, and I now support President Trump because he has done more for the unborn than any other president.
Joining me on the phone to discuss this more is CBS News reporter Kate Smith. Kate, thank you very much for joining us. I want to get some context for you, because over the course of her remarks, Abby Johnson also talked about Margaret Sanger, and she specifically addressed Margaret Sanger's beliefs in eugenics. And in fact, we know that the New York affiliate of Planned Parenthood of Greater New York has talked about this as well, saying that they are removing Margaret Sanger's name from their building, and they called it in a statement both a, quote, necessary and overdue step to reckon with our legacy and acknowledge Planned Parenthood's contributions to historical reproductive harm within communities of color. So give us a little bit of the background here and the context, Kate, for what we heard tonight.
Thanks so much for having me, Elaine. I think what makes Abby Johnson's appearance, both as a figurehead for the anti-abortion rights movement and her inclusion at the RNC tonight, so unique is that not only is Johnson an activist for that side of this debate, but she also is a former Planned Parenthood employee. So when she speaks about her experience, providing that care to patients, she does come with a different kind of perspective than the usual types of people that we hear talking about the anti-abortion rights movement. However, it's very important to note that, during that 5-minute remark that she did make at the RNC tonight, the event that she described, the abortion that she performed that, was the turning point for her, that is a story that many have contested. There have been a lot of reports, conflicting just the very, truthful nature of that. So it's important to note that a large portion of her speech has been, largely contested by groups, on both sides of the aisle. And then she did, of course, bring up Margaret Sanger's, inclusion of Planned Parenthood, one of the, organization's founders. But again, like you note, this is a figure within Planned Parenthood that they have struggled with, and they have most recently denounced, saying that they have moved forward as an organization. Her inclusion in their organization was problematic, and it's something they are looking forward and looking to rectify. So, her bringing this up is something that the organization has already looked forward on. But again, it speaks to that base of evangelicals who, they want to hear about Trump's wins on the anti-abortion rights movement, and this is something that speaks to them. It gets them excited, and it does get them to vote. There are a lot of single-issue voters on both sides of the abortion issue, but especially on the anti-abortion rights side of this issue.
All right, Kate Smith for us. Kate, thank you very much. That does it for our coverage of Day 2 of the Republican National Convention. Join us here again tomorrow for Day 3. Our pre-show starts right here at 8 p.m. Eastern. Make sure to download the free CBS News app so you can continue watching updates from the RNC for the rest of this week. We'll have more news after a break. Stick with us. You're streaming CBSN.